Afternoon, everyone. So I am Councillor Kimberly Barrett, Cabinet Member for Climate Change and the Green Recovery. Please be assured that we put appropriate cleansing and social distancing measures in place today to ensure this meeting is undertaken in a COVID-secure manner. This has included a request for all attendees to have taken a lateral flow test within the last 48 hours of the meeting, so I'm assuming everyone's all right. The use of NHS Track and Trace app or the attendee log, 2 metre social distancing, the wearing of masks when not seated, and one-way system in the Guildhall. Limited public seating has been made available. However, this meeting is also being webcast to allow the public to attend remotely if they wish so. Please be advised that the public seating area is not in view of the camera, but there's no one up there at the moment, so that's okay. Can I please ask members to remain seated throughout the duration of the meeting and to wear a face covering unless seated. Only use seats marked with a green circle, and they've been allocated to ensure a 2 metre social distancing. So just a few housekeeping rules. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts, and as there's a huge ice rink in the Guildhall Square at the moment, if we could assemble at the turning circle at the end of King Henry Street past the University's Park building, that would be fab. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust Fire Marshal regulations, anyone who signed in at the Guildhall reception desk should sign out when leaving the building at the end of today's meeting. Everyone speaking via a microphone will be on camera. Members of the press and public are permitted to record the meeting as long as it doesn't disrupt the meeting. There's no one there though, so that's also fine. Please can everyone use the microphones, and please do remember to switch them off when they're finished, otherwise we'll focus solely on you for the whole meeting. We've all read the report, so officers, if you could highlight any developments that have occurred since publication, that would be fab. And I think if we just do some introductions, just in case some people who are watching don't know, that would be great. So I will start this side with Andrew, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Andrew Waggett. I'm the Energy Services Team Manager at Portsmouth City Council.
I'm Jane Didino, Local Democracy Officer.
And Kelly Nash, Corporate Performance Manager.
Councillor Charlotte Gerardo for Central Southsea.
Councillor Robert Newcopner Ward.
Councillor Gerald Jackson, Milton Ward.
Perfect. So first of all on our agenda is apologies for any absence. Have we had anything at all?
No, Chair.
Thank you. So any declarations of interest from anybody at all? No. No. Perfect. Okay, then we'll just move on swiftly to the first report. So that's the Portsmouth City Council membership of the UK 100. I think Kelly, you're speaking on that, aren't you?
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Yeah, just to introduce this very briefly, UK 100, as the report sets out, is a network of local government leaders, and it's an organisation that's come together to enable those leaders to have as most influence as they can really on agendas, and also access advocacy support to promote the agenda of local government. Lots of other benefits for it as well, for example, access to programmes for support and peer challenge across authorities. Portsmouth City Council was approached to join the network, which we've done so with enthusiasm really. The pledge that is attached sets out really what UK 100 is all about and what we as an organisation pledge to do in order to fulfil that membership. But the key issues are probably set out in paragraph 3.6 of the covering report, which says that the Council will act sooner than required by the government's requirements to make substantial progress in the next decade. That as a network, we will lobby for greater powers and funding to go further faster. That the Council will do everything it can within its power and influence to make reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, and that we will work with communities to build consensus around solutions. What we've pledged to do as part of this is obviously do annual reporting of data, and we will be working on how we'll do that in order to satisfy the requirements. And I think it's probably just worth saying that this picks up on our declaration of a climate emergency, which sets out our own local target, and that is reflected in the pledge. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Kelly. I know I was really pleased that we signed up to this. You know, we have to acknowledge that we really need to be working quickly on this stuff. The government have set a timetable, but if we can push further faster, then let's just get on and do that. So yeah, thank you so much for that. I don't know if Charlotte or Rob, if you've got any questions or comments about this at all.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome this, as I'm sure most of us do, and actually I think to Portsmouth City Council's credit and the members, I think that we have been pushing harder, faster than many other local authorities, and I think that's to our credit. The only question I had, perhaps, which is really for Kelly, and it's just because I'm sure that it's probably a simple answer to this. With regards to kind of like measuring, I suppose, across the whole council, just because it is so vast and with the changes of recent departments, portfolios, etc., how are we going to measure that we are actually doing what we're setting out to actually do?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. In an organisation of our scale and complexity, it is pretty challenging. There are a number of existing frameworks and protocols for actually capturing these things, and what we're doing in the winter through to the next review of the strategy, which we'll talk about as part of one of the next reports, is actually identifying that framework for the authority and making sure that that's embedded through the organisation so that we actually do that capturing as a matter of course. So there's a plan to get there, and we'll be bringing that forward, I would have thought, probably at the next one of these meetings. Can't quite remember the date of it, but it may be ready for the next one of these, if not then the one following. But yeah, we're absolutely working on that because it is a really important part of actually knowing if we're taking impactful actions, is that we've actually got a baseline for which we can measure and track from. So yeah, absolutely.
Any other questions or comments at the moment? No? Right. Well, obviously this is a notary report, so I just wanted to pass on thanks to the officers for getting us signed up for that. It's got some really good targets to make sure that we're hitting them, and we'll talk further in further reports coming forward to this meeting. So we'll move on to number 4, which is the Portsmouth Climate Festival, which is absolutely fantastic, but I'll pass back to Kelly again.
Thank you. Me again. So this is just a brief information report which summarises some of the activity that took place as part of the first Portsmouth Climate Festival, which happened between the 22nd of October and the 12th of November. The format of the festival was very much an umbrella festival, so rather than being a series of commissioned events, it was events that came up really grassroots from the community and other organisations, and were kind of banded together in a whole period of time to really celebrate and raise awareness of the climate issue within the city and the activities that people are undertaking. It was put together at quite short notice, and there were a number of reasons for that, including sort of some of the materials coming relatively late and just understanding what the wider programme was that we'd be fitting into. We were also quite successful at achieving some funding, again at reasonably short notice, that enabled us to put on a couple of events at no extra cost to those organising organisations, really. In terms of the organising organisations, that was Portsmouth City Council in partnership with Portsmouth University and the Climate Action Board, and they very much championed the festival throughout all their networks, contributed a lot of the events to that, and will obviously take a role now in going forward and evaluating the success of that and seeing if it's something we want to do again in future. In terms of that evaluation, there are going to be a whole load of things to look at in terms of what the reach of the festival was, were there things that we could have done to actually increase that reach if we sort of commissioned events more directly rather than looking at them bubbling up. Certainly, is there a geographic question to look at, because I think certainly a lot of the events were concentrated in the south of the city, and we'd want to look at that something there again. Would that help if we had a more direct commissioning approach rather than just waiting for things to bubble up and we could sort of look at directing those? So quite a few things that we'd want to look at in the evaluation, but I think broadly the early feedback is there's certainly something that people have felt is a really positive thing, and I think there's a lot of appetite to look to how we would do something positive like that in the future. And I think now we've got a sort of really good baseline to work from, we could look at opportunities such as securing sponsorship to enable some of that direct commissioning activity as well. But yeah, I think it's been real success and real highlights, including the sort of adventures of the Florence, the Mermaid's Tears, which was a commissioned event, but obviously commissioned through the Arts Council, which again, something really important about that, different mediums that carried the message really, so the cultural stuff, the scientific stuff that came from the university, some things that would have real purchase for domestic homeowners, some things that were really targeted at young people, so that real reach, and I think that's something we definitely want to hold on to in anything that we go forward. So this is just a little information report highlighting we did it, there is an evaluation coming forward, and we would hope that in future we'll bring forward proposals for how we'll sustain this sort of format into the future. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. I know on a personal note, I went to a number of some of the events. I know, Charlotte, you held one as well, and I know a lot of people in the room went to a number of the events. So it was really, really good to see so many different organisations across the city, so many groups, community groups, Friends of the Earth, I know they held a walk. It was just really nice to see collaboration on that sort of scale. If we could do it bigger, grander, especially now that we have a lot more time to consider what we can do, I think that would be great, because it's something that is really important. People really enjoyed themselves, and as Kelly said, there were so many different things that you could do, whether it was talks, whether it was watching a film, whether it was taking part in a walk, and also the artistic side of things as well. I think it was just really good, and it was really nice to have that collaborative approach as well with the university. I know Andrew and his team put together an event quite short notice, which was really well attended, so congratulations to them. But congratulations to everyone, I think, really, who took part, because it was so successful. And yeah, I think it's something we could really look to do in the future. With a bit more time, we could do a bit more spread out across the city and have even more partners come to us. So yeah, no, really good work on everyone's behalf. Rob?
Thank you, Chair. And again, I just echo my congratulations to everybody that made this possible. It looks great. And I did catch Councillor Horton's very good speech, actually, which I thought was very well received. So is the aspiration then to make this an annual event? Because I think that would be great.
I think really, yes, it would be, because it's, like we said, it's such an important thing. And I know I've spoken to a number of people and had a lot of correspondence, and it was great to see that people who probably wouldn't have gone to these kind of events before did go, now are much more aware of the situation that's going on, and that's what we really want, is sort of education, but to make it fun and interesting. So now that we know it's worked quite well, you know, I think it's a good step forward to be able to push on. We've got more time, you know, I think that's probably the case. I would hope so anyway. That's what I would like to see. I don't know, Kelly, if you want to say anything on that.
No, I mean, I think I absolutely agree. There's been lots of really positive feedback, and I think we just need to go through and work out where those things that we could improve in the future. And, you know, I think it doesn't matter how successful something is, there's always something you can learn from it and improve, so we just need to make sure we capture those lessons. We want to go out to people who actually ran events and kind of get a sense from them about the reach of the event, what they could have done differently, how the sort of format could have helped them differently with running the events, really. So all of those things, and then if we've got a doable solution, I think certainly there would be appetite for looking at it again. So we just need to work through the evaluation and work out what the correct format and future is.
Charlotte?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to echo sentiments really, that I think the festival was fantastic, and the sort of broad range of different events was really, really positive. In particular, the play was just great because it coincided with half term as well, so it was a free play for parents and carers to take their children. So, yeah, I think it's great to have a diversity of mix of events and really endorse it being held again next year. The only feedback I received is if it could be planned a bit earlier, and particularly around promotion of events as well, just to make sure that for the people who are putting on events that there is some way of really promoting the events that are taking place. But other than that, yes, the feedback's been positive. The only other feedback that we received, or members of this committee received, it was just about if there would be an evaluation that's being taken place. You've answered that question, and again, feedback was, could we hold the events in a more diverse range of locations, which again has been mentioned, and I completely agree with that, because with a lot of things it can be concentrated in the south of the city, so I think that's brilliant. Thank you.
No, thank you. I mean, just to come back on the half-term point, we originally talked about holding the festival just through the days of COP, and then realised that actually by extending it a week before, it did pick up half-term and enabled some things to happen. And I think that's certainly a lesson we'd want to hold on to again, about how do we make sure that things are as accessible as possible. And again, think about how families can participate outside of schools, because otherwise we tend to sometimes default to events through schools, but actually sometimes families really want to get involved in those together. So that was real learning from there. And absolutely, I think the geographic thing, in hindsight, I think a lot of things were driven into the south of the city simply because that's where some of the venues are. So the university was sort of using the lecture theatres, which is absolutely sensible, but what we probably didn't do was think of a counterbalance for there. And again, having seen that, I think we'll have a real opportunity to build a programme that works for the entire city next time, and that's something we're really positive about doing.
Perfect, thank you. Any other questions at all? Or No, perfect. Okay. Then we will now move on to the Portsmouth Carbon Maturity Assessment. So passing back to Kelly again.
Yeah, I'm really sorry, it is me again. So this is just coming really for broader transparency purposes. It was a report that we received in October, I think it was, and it was not really commissioned. I couldn't say we were commissioned. We were invited to participate in a tool that was being developed, and we did so because we'll always take up opportunities to learn. And the report that is attached is kind of the output of that tool that was commissioned. So City Sciences are looking to develop an audit of local authorities, not emissions. It's absolutely not an audit of emissions, but it is an audit of kind of strategic development and identifying areas where there are strengths to build on, and also areas where maybe we might need to look and put a bit of attention to that. So I think there's probably a lot of interest across the city in just what informs our thinking around sort of strategic development, and so this report comes really as part of the transparency framework, letting you know some of the material that we're having in order to inform those, and also some really helpful recommendations I think that came out of it that we will absolutely use to inform the next review of the strategy. So that's looking to present back in February 2022, and obviously the key recommendations and findings there is that actually there's something around we're performing ahead of the peer group, which is always a helpful thing to know and get that validation. And I know again there's a lot of interest in how we compare with other authorities, so I think that's probably helpful context. But I think in terms of those areas for improvement, I think there's some really helpful stuff around quantification, and actually that very particular to Portsmouth issue around how we deal with sort of looking at freight in the city, particularly with the links to the port. So I think some helpful information. We'll add that to any other information that we use as part of developing the strategy, but again, for transparency purposes, we thought it'd be useful to bring that here and have it considered.
Perfect, thanks Kelly. I know when I sat in the meeting with yourself and City Sciences, it was great to see a company that are really enthusiastic and willing to help us. And whilst it's really good news to see that we are ahead of the curve, so to speak, it's also great to be able to pick up on what we need to do as a city and push forward with that. It's another target that we can set and look forward to doing that. So Charlotte or Rob, I don't know if you've got any questions or points at all. Charlotte?
Thank you, that's really kind. Thank you, Chair. I just had a few sort of points and questions, I guess. I wondered how this is sort of suggested improvements that the council could make sort of fits in with the motion that was passed at full council recently around decarbonisation, and in particular committing the council to a full citywide carbon audit. So I just wondered how those two audits sit together, and also what the sort of plan of action is regarding the motion that was recently passed. Also, I thought it was quite interesting because some of the areas for improvement, although obviously the report was very positive and it shows the excellent work of the council, so very grateful for all that's being done. What it does show is some of the sort of gaps that were highlighted in the motion that we presented to full council. So part of it was about the council playing more of like a citywide leadership role and encouraging residents and businesses and organisations beyond the scope of the council's estate itself. So I just wondered if there were any sort of immediate ideas or thoughts on that perspective, and in particular around the sort of commercial element as well, given that, for example, freight was highlighted as something that is a major sort of carbon emitter in the city. And also just on the sort of lack of citizens' engagement is something that came through in the report as well, and I just wondered what the council and council officers had planned to try and change that, essentially. Sorry, that's a lot of questions and comments.
Yep, okay. Right, so I'll try and take them in turn and pick me up at the end if I've missed anything. But the first one about how it fits in with the motion, I think they're entirely complementary. I think the motion was very specifically focused on the audit around the actual emissions and the work there, and I think this is, as I say, an audit more of the strategic development. I think the audit of emissions will absolutely feed that, so I don't see them separate at all. I see them as entirely complementary, and absolutely one doesn't replace the other. If I think the basis of concern is a case of the two things working in complement. As I say, this is more an audit of kind of areas for development, strengths, weaknesses that we can sort of play to. actually an audit of emissions would be very much sort of quantification of the actual sources and what we would need to do to drive those down very specifically. So absolutely complementary pieces of work. I think the second one in terms of plan of action for the motion, yeah, we were ideally, I think we'd have brought that to this meeting, but just timescales of distribution and what have you doesn't allow that. But yes, we would be expecting to bring an action plan that sort of sets out those things that were in the motion, how we'd respond to them in the normal way of things, and I would expect that to be in the next one of these meetings. In terms of the gaps highlighted in the motion, in terms of the city-wide leadership role, I think, again, that's something we've been playing through with colleagues on the Climate Action Board, and as colleagues may know, there's actually a process happening now about looking at the way that that operates across the city, and we're playing our part in that, and we'll just wait for the conclusions of that to kick in, really, which would be the appropriate forum. The commercial element, I think, is really interesting and important, because actually there are a couple of things at play there. The one about freight, in many ways plays to sort of some of the larger industries that we've got in the city, and we're certainly looking to join up with those larger organisations, anchor institutions and employers, and actually start saying, well, okay, so what are our actions as those anchor institutions? You know, there's some really concrete actions we could be taking there, and that's something that we need to be progressing. So conversations are underway with some of those institutions, and we'd look to be sort of bringing that work together as a kind of almost partnership response to that. So we certainly logged that. There's also obviously the issues around small and medium enterprise as well, and sort of how we work effectively with those, and we're really grateful to have the support Shaping Portsmouth in doing some of that, and they've certainly launched, or they're in the process of launching a tool to work with some of those businesses, but there are some other opportunities coming on stream that we're exploring as well, which we think would be really supportive for businesses in the local area, and I think we'll probably be in a position to talk about that in the next session as well, but yeah, I think not this one in terms of the detail, but probably the next meeting. But there's definitely some offers that we think might be supportive of business, and we really need to be progressing those. And I think the final one's around citizen engagement. One of the things we're hoping to do as part of the response to the festival is actually almost put that as a centrepiece of an engagement strategy for the city, because actually now we've got that and sort of stumbled on that, I think, a little bit by accident, but actually what a great centrepiece to have sort of something like that almost you can then put those engagement activities around, and they can be sort of quite educational and factual, and it's really about making sure that our materials include the right information, enable people to make choices, but actually again going right through to that creative cultural engagement, and how do we get all different sections of the community engaged in this. So I think one of our actions coming off of that is absolutely to centre that in part of a wider plan, so I think that will absolutely form part of it. Did that pick up all of them? Brilliant, thank you.
Councillor News, do you want to jump?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I completely echo all of Councillor Gerarda's questions. I think they're very good. And just kind of following on from that, I suppose really, I mean, it's positive to hear what you said, Kelly, about citizen engagement specifically, because one of the things I always worry about is that while us politicos, climate activists and more elite people are very much in the throng of everything that's in current affairs around climate change, I often worry about how that gets through to your normal, everyday working class person, you know, who are leading busy lives, stressful lives, and, you know, this stuff's very much on the periphery unless they turn on the news, and like how we actually get it through to people, not to lecture, but to take people on the journey with us. And so I think the festival will certainly play a role in that. But yeah, I suppose really why it jumped out to me, as perhaps it did to Councillor Gerarda, is because on the actual analysis that we've got, we actually score quite highly on level 2. But yeah, that's one of the core things around citizen engagement. But I do also appreciate that it is still early days on this work as well. So that's certainly something that came across my radar. But the other thing is that we scored very highly also on level 1 and level 5, so as a carbon influencer. And I suppose probably from an economic background, because obviously I do know that as a council we are actually quite far ahead on this agenda, but there is obviously much more to do. But dare I say, when it talks about things such as being a carbon influencer, and because Portsmouth is really like, I suppose, the jewel in the crown of this Solent area, and the other local authorities are smaller boroughs, etc., that we may have some opportunities to be able to help those local authorities through services that, dare I say, that we could sell or offer to co-fund and make further savings on there. Because I did note as well that while on level 3 we have advised that we've got funding in place, but we don't know what the carbon savings will be yet until much further work is done. I just thought kind of in the round it sounded like there was opportunities there to not only be a leader in this sector, but to also possibly capitalise on it with our colleagues and take them along with us.
Thank you. I mean, I don't disagree with the points you made, and I think Andrew's probably much better placed to talk about some of those services that we've been able to support other authorities with. But just to say, we're also playing active parts in regional groupings that obviously have a climate element to them, and certainly playing a big part, for example, in the development of the green print for the area as well. So lots of that in train, but I think Andrew's probably well placed to talk about some of those actual services that we've been supporting other councils with.
Yeah, certainly will. Always happy to sell energy services wider than Portsmouth itself. We've been relatively successful over the course of the last 12 months or so in securing a significant amount of funding. I'm saying significant, I'm stalling because I'm trying to add it up in my head, but it's about £17 million for domestic energy efficiency retrofit in the private sector. So that's not just for Portsmouth, but that's for Portsmouth and a consortium largely based around us in West Sussex and Hampshire and South Hampshire authorities. We may have some other good news coming in that space over the coming few weeks as well, which I'm not allowed to talk about at the moment. But we are trying to set that agenda, I think, particularly when it comes to domestic energy efficiency retrofit in the area. And we're actually working with a consortium of 20 authorities, 19 other local authorities, we're the 20th on that work. It is a real area where we can influence beyond the remit of Portsmouth City Council, if you like. You know, there's no statutory duty upon us to put energy efficiency measures into private homes. But it is something that we've identified as being a strength of ours, and it's something that we're trying to build on that strength by pulling money into this agenda. And it bears saying it is that money that makes people engage with this. If you're saying I'm going to put free solar panels on your house or free solid wall insulation on your walls, free air source heat pump, that gets better cut through than some of the other things that we do in domestic, which is guiding people to learn more about an air source heat pump or how a solar panel works or whatever. And the explanation isn't as popular as getting £10,000 worth of free measures on your property. Let's put it that way. But that's one of the places where we're looking to try and lead that.
Any other questions or comments at all? Yeah.
One final question that's come from a resident, and that's when the climate emergency strategy is due to be reviewed, please.
Yeah, so we're in the process of reviewing that, and obviously we've had a period of some disruption to usual activity, but we're certainly now back on that and looking to present that back to. I'm not 100% sure whether we're going to bring it back to this meeting or whether we'll bring it back to full cabinet. I suspect full cabinet because the original one was, and that would be before the end of the municipal year, so it'll be February.
Any other comments at all? No? Of course.
This might not be directly related, but it's something that's come up in the planning committee over years and years and years, and no one's ever really been able to answer it. But again, going back to level 5 of the analysis and what falls under this, where it talks about looking to tackle hard to decarbonise sectors, with like housing developers, etc., will that be something that we will be looking to actively encourage? Because I don't know, it strikes me recently a lot of the developments that we've seen are make a quick buck sort of, developments, which you can't really blame developers for that, but at the same time it's not really compatible with our vision for where we want to go in terms of decarbonisation, our climate agenda, and the emergency that the council has declared, and how we can get it to sync up. Because I think one of the problems that I'm sure Councillor Vernon-Jackson probably feels the same on as well, is that when you're considering a planning application, you have to pretty much determine it on what's presented in front of you and the existing framework. So I suppose what I'm asking is, will this work eventually lead on to changing our own special policies internally to provide a policy there which would look to change the hard-to-decarbonise sector of housing developments?
Thank you, and I know this is something that exercises our planning colleagues. I'm really not best to talk to the technicalities of that, but what I will undertake to do is circulate a briefing note to this committee around how that is being fed into, if that's okay. Thank you.
Brilliant. Any other questions at all? No. Well, thank you both for that. That was really informative and a good chat about that, so thank you. We will carry on pushing on with the targets that have been set and the comments made, and come back to you and members of the public. So I think it's just really important with this kind of information that we make sure that it is shared with everybody. It's all our city, so yeah, and just keep everyone up to date with what we are actually doing. So that's great, so thank you very much for that. We'll move on next to the public sector decarbonisation scheme. So I'll hand over to Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This report's an information report regarding the public sector decarbonisation scheme, or PSDS as I'll call it. This funding came from the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy through their finance arm called Salix Finance. Portsmouth City Council bid for just under £1.9 million worth of funding in January of this year to enable works that wouldn't have happened otherwise, essentially, for energy efficiency purposes. It was interesting that PSDS for the first time actually awarded us or rewarded us on the basis of interventions which made the maximum amount of carbon saving per capital measure, as opposed to what Salix has done in the past and Bays have done in the past, which is all about what's the biggest bang for buck in terms of finance. This report is reporting the savings that have been, or the interventions that have been made to date as things stand today, because this is an ongoing project and will finish in at the end of March with a fair wind. But among the things that have been delivered here are cavity wall insulation, loft insulation, low energy lighting, LED lighting, solar PV systems, building management systems, heating controls, and improving the efficiency of heating systems more generally, but also batteries as well, which is a piece of infrastructure that in time will enable or better enable electric heating to be adopted by the sites that have been treated. The full list of sites are in Appendix A of the report. They're a bit of a movable feast at the moment because some of this funding was put together, or the funding bid was put together, sort of post haste at the end of last year in a kind of quite a typical way for us in terms of here's a funding opportunity, you've got 10 minutes to apply for it, sort of thing. So there will still be changes to this, but fundamentally we're going to deliver what's in the tables in section 5, essentially in terms of carbon saving, which is roughly 260 tonnes of CO2e per annum, or at least in year 1. And yeah, I'll not go through everything, but if members have questions, please.
Thanks very much for that, Andrew. I know you guys and your team have been working really hard on a number of projects, but it's really great to see the amount of work that have been put, over 50, I can't even remember now, 50 different sites, and I have been to see a number of those sites and seen the stuff being implemented, so the cavity wall insulation, loft insulation, the LED lighting being changed over. The teams have been really efficient, really quick, have worked really well, and that has been sent to me by some of the building managers. So I just wanted to report that back to say well done to the teams who are doing that. But it's great to see that we are pushing forward with this stuff, and the fact that we your team keeps getting awarded all these grants and things, I think is a really good thing to talk about, is a really good thing to acknowledge, because we are leading in this industry, and we are pushing forward to make sure that our buildings, we are trying to get them as best as possible. So huge thank you to your team for that. And yeah, it's, these measures have to be put in by the end of March next year. They're already going forward, and I think it's just a great start to what we can do for the city and to save as much carbon as possible. It's just one of those stepping stones that we're jumping on at the moment. So really good work. But any questions or comments at all at the moment? No. Charlotte, do you want to say something?
Thank you, Chair. Just a question about the jobs. Is there any possibility you could provide a bit more detail about the jobs as an outcome of the project?
certainly try. So we've put in the body of the report the figure that we gave to Salix, which I think is 50 jobs, with a reading back through the report, 50 jobs being supported through this scheme. The guidance that Salix gave us when reporting the number of jobs supported was just basically anybody who was associated and working on the project. So that included the internal project managers, the guys putting cavity wall insulation into the walls, the lighting designers doing the lighting design, etc., etc. So it does very quickly bank up, particularly when you have that range of technologies, because they're quite specialist in terms of, you know, a cavity wall installer is likely to be someone different to a loft installer, is likely to be someone different to a solar PV installer, etc. And that's where we got to that 50 jobs figure. My slight health warning around that 50 jobs figure is that it doesn't necessarily say that there have been 50 jobs created, and I think increasingly that's going to be one of the things that we're trying to find in terms of an analytic out of these projects. The barrier to that, obviously, is that this is a very short-term pot of funding. It runs until March 22 now, but actually when we bid for this, it actually should have ended in September, and it was only because actually Salix recognised that there just weren't enough people in the supply chain in this area, working in this area at the time. There was a complete dearth of people to work in this area, that they did have to extend it out by a further 6 months, that combined with material shortages and things like this in this area as well. So it's a real challenge to how we're going to move to a net zero carbon position within and zero carbon building position, because at the moment the supply chain, although we're doing little bits and pieces around the side of that, doesn't really exist. And it's a national and international problem, I should say. It's not just a Portsmouth specific one.
Any other questions at all?
It was just really, I take your point where the funding finishes in March of next year. Is it likely, has government indicated, that there will be further opportunities to access money to continue this work, I suppose, and even perhaps beyond the public estate as well?
Yes, they have. The government published its heating and building strategy about 4 or 5 weeks ago now, I think it was. And within the announcement of the ESSOS heat pump scheme that sort of made all the headlines, there's actually £1.5 billion near on put aside for further public sector decarbonisation scheme rounds. We've spoken a little bit in the next step section about what we're doing and what we're learning from this project in terms of trying to put ourselves in a better position for when the next round of this funding is announced, so that it's not drop everything and we're hoping to develop a sort of an oven-ready pipeline of projects that are relatively straightforward to put to Salix to say, okay, please fund these, and we're doing that through site audit, through modelling. It'll bleed in a little bit actually into the next report as well, to make sure that we've basically got the stuff at our fingertips, so that when the funding comes through, we can bid into it.
Charlotte.
Just thank you, Chair. One final question, follow up from Councillor New in that response there. If more funding is secured, how will future sites be chosen?
So we obviously, as the next report again will show, we have a lot of data about where our electricity and gas has been consumed within our portfolio. And I should say the public sector decarbonisation is only interested in the operational buildings that sit on our corporate electricity and gas contract. So we know where the high consumers are, and we do a lot of surveys of those sites for numbers of different reasons. Some are for planned and preventative maintenance. Others are specifically have an energy bent to them, things like display energy certificates, energy performance certificates. So we're very regularly visiting these sites, and actually, because we've spent more time on the 50-odd sites that are identified in Appendix A, we've actually spent a lot more time thinking, if we'd have known about that, would have submitted for that as well. So we've actually built up a fairly decent bank of future projects, actually, just through this bit of work that we're doing here. They'll be identified, but there's what we'd like to do, and then there's what the funding will allow us to do within the terms of the funding. So we will obviously apply for as much funding as we can, and we think we can deliver sensibly without letting Salix or Bays down. But within the boundary, within the the threshold of a measure achieving an average, or the blend of measures achieving an average of £500 per tonne of carbon lifetime saved. If indeed for PSDS 4, as the next round would be, the kind of criteria remain the same, if you see what I mean. But we'll fit something within the criteria. We might not be able to do absolutely everything that we'd like to do to make an energy efficiency saving on those sites.
Thank you. Any other questions at all from anyone? No. Brilliant. Thank you. Well, once again, Andrew, thank you for that. I know this is something you've been working on for some time, and officers have, so really appreciate the hard work that's gone into it, and look forward to some more information coming forward soon. So we'll now move on to the last item, which is our approach to estate decarbonisation. So I'll pass back to Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. This report is sets out the carbon emissions from Portsmouth City Council's non-domestic buildings portfolio that come from energy consumption, so electricity and gas consumption. They show the baseline of where we were in 2010 to 2011 and where we've got to in the last reporting year, which is 2020-21. They also, within the body of the report, there's also a projection for some of the projects that we are absolutely solidly know about. So the key ones of those being the PV, solar PV and battery storage work at the Portsmouth International Port and at Lakeside North Harbour, as well as some of the other things that we're doing actually under the PSDS scheme and some of the things that we're aware of. It also looks at that digression in terms of or that reduction in terms of the carbon emissions, and tries to articulate some of the interventions that have already been made within the sites. The key takeaway, I suppose, from it is that although Portsmouth City Council's emissions are from electricity and gas are fairly enormous, there are 5 sites, or five MPANs, I suppose. Five sites is probably the right term, where sort of two-thirds of our carbon emissions are coming from, and they are Lakeside North Harbour, civic offices, the lighting portfolio, which is why I hesitated and tripped slightly over the word site, because whether or not you class the entire lighting portfolio as a site or not, the Mountbatten Centre and the International Port, I should say that we can pick those 5 sites off as priority sites, and we talk a little bit about what we would intend to do in terms of auditing those sites. In the graph in section 3.31, there is non-domestic other. 32% of our emissions, but that represents literally hundreds of sites. So those 5 sites are really big hitters. It's not that those sites in and of themselves are particularly energy intense and carbon intense, but more just the sheer size of them, the sheer scale of them. Lakeside North Harbour is enormous. If you run an international ferry port, it uses a lot of electricity. So it's not saying that they're high users in terms of high emitters in terms of that, but it does focus the mind as to where we would like to go in terms of carrying out audits within our portfolio. It doesn't pretend that we've done it all. There's a significant slab of the savings and the emissions reductions which have come about because of grid decarbonisation. So 60% of all of the emission saving have come from grid from electricity carbon digression in the electricity factors. But really, that's just taken into account within the report. It includes the reports and the buildings portfolio that we have today. It doesn't dine out on the fact that we've novated some of our sites to academies. This is our buildings portfolio today, and it includes the fact that we've bought Lakeside in that period of time as well. So if we'd wanted to massage the numbers a bit, I'm sure we could have done and made it look a lot lower, but we've just been honest. These are the things that are inside of our operational control. These are our scope 1 and 2 emissions from electricity, or largely scope 1 and 2 emissions from gas and electricity, and this is how we're going to set about trying to reduce them.
Thank you, Andrew. Once again, I know this has been something that's been ongoing for months, and I think it's a really detailed report, and I really welcome it coming forward. And I think it's really interesting. I know when I was first presented with it, it was really interesting to see the drop we've had, and that's not just from our administration; it's across the last 10 or so years. So it just shows the kind of work that we are putting in. Like you said, we could have taken out Lakeside, but it's something that we own. It's something that is going to be a big emitter, so we need to make sure that we acknowledge it and start the work there where we can start decarbonisation there. And I'm really pleased with the report. It's good to see how much carbon is dropping in the city, but as you said, we haven't done everything. We've still got a lot more to do. Obviously the focus at the moment is across those 5 sites, but once we start pushing forward with them, then we can start looking at other sites as well. And that's not to say we're not looking at them at all. It's just the focus will be on the biggest ones that we have there, and we'll come back with a report soon as to how we push forward with that. But like I said, a huge credit to Andrew, the team and all the officers who've been working extremely hard and long hours on this report coming forward. So I really appreciate the time and effort that's gone in, and it gives us a good idea of where we need to work on. Thank you. So Charlotte or Gerald or Rob, any questions or points at all? No? Charlotte?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report, and massive thanks to all the council staff who've worked really hard on this. It's impressive in terms of the numbers. I just wondered with Lakeside in particular, I know obviously the council has obviously relatively recently gained the site, but I just wondered if there was a rough plan and some ideas around how carbon emissions could be reduced for that particular site. And also obviously the sort of energy outputs is one thing, and I know that's the main focus, but another sort of big citywide contributing factor to carbon emissions is around transport and how people get to these sites, because unfortunately some of them, like Lakeside in particular, they are in places that aren't amazingly connected, and a lot of people drive to them. There's lots of traffic and congestion there. So I just wondered if there were any sort of plans in place around the sort of transport links and the emissions to get to and from as well. Thank you.
Yeah, there are. I should say we've tried to tie quite a tight ribbon around this one in terms of what it is talking about and it isn't talking about. So this is talking about electricity and gas usage. It's not talking about transport, but obviously I'll pick up on that. There is in terms of plan for Lakeside, I think we've got a significant project there which involves solar and battery storage and electric vehicle charging at the site as well, which will include roof mount solar and also solar canopies across some of the car park areas, of which there's obviously a whole football field's worth of car parking at Lakeside. We've actually already put in some electric vehicle charging at Lakeside, which sort of is inside of that project, but outside of that project, if you see what I mean, because there was a demand from the tenants, and we're doing some work with the tenants at the moment to understand what demand there's going to be now and in the future for electric vehicle charging at that site as well. In terms of a wider plan, really this sets out that we're pointing at Lakeside and saying we really need a better plan as to what we do there. There are some clear opportunities that I can see with my own eyes of just walking around that site where we can make interventions that will make significant carbon reduction savings. But I think we'll probably bring that back to you, if that's all right, in terms of that more detailed audit, which will set forward a range of interventions that we can make, and also highlight some of the cost of doing that as well, actually, frankly, because it's a big site and it could potentially require big investment to get there. In terms of the transport work that we're doing, I can talk really on an energy services team level, and when we're putting in solar, we're increasingly installing electric vehicle charging alongside those sites. Lakeside being a key example of that, but also the work that we did at Port Royal Street Depot and Paulsgrove Housing Office as well in the early part of this year. We're also doing some work as well, which came to the cabinet. I think it was was it this month? No, it must have been last month or earlier this month, talking about rapid electric vehicle charging. But the team's also engaged in the on-street electric vehicle charging as well. You're right. The people drive to those sites, and they need facilities within those sites to be able to enable electric vehicle charging. And I think we're going in a lot more with that in mind now when we're looking to do this stuff, and also installing batteries and things like that to balance those loads as well, so we can use the solar from the roof. It doesn't have to instantaneously be used either by the electric vehicle charger or the site, but you can put batteries in there, and you can balance those loads that are going on there, if that makes sense. But we'll certainly start teasing some of that stuff out. I don't know if you want to say a bit about transport, Kelly.
Yeah, I mean, we've had this exact conversation, haven't we? Because when you said you tried to tie a ribbon around it, that's kind of exactly what we've tried to do with it. Because how do you eat the elephant? Chunk by chunk, really. And what we've tried to do is say that all of the work around transport and other sources as well actually will have their place within the overall strategy. What we're trying to say is within each of those, while we're making the links at this level, we need to chunk it down operationally to actually make the differences into areas of work that firstly are sort of manageable and sensible, and I think the rationale around actually tackling those 5 big hitters absolutely has a high impact bent to it. But actually also, how do we line it up with, for example, really pragmatically, where there's a funding source that enables some of this to accelerate. So what we're trying to do is put it into manageable packages of work, but at the same time then tying it all back up at the strategic level. So we are absolutely making those links, as Andrew says, across the transport elements of those, around we might need to be looking at supply chain issues as well related to it, and all other sorts of supply as well, because energy is one part of what we do, but as you absolutely pick up, there are loads of other things we need to be looking at as well. What we said is, when we have our new climate officer in post, actually what she'll be doing is working through those chunk by chunk by chunk to actually input to them, but actually do that tying back together so you can actually see how it all forms one coherent piece. So absolutely, as Andrew's right, this is part of a wider piece of work, but this is quite a tightly contained piece of work, simply in terms of what the team has within their agency, but also where we might be able to get those resources into it.
Sorry, if I may, sorry, Councillor, if I may, the reason for some of the, so for transport, for example, and the reason that the new officer, when she's in post, will look at this, I'm sure, with a bit of interest, is that if people are travelling to Lakeside, North Harbour, with an electric vehicle and charging at Lakeside, then that actually becomes one of Portsmouth City Council's Scope 2 emissions when they're charging through the electricity provided there. As long as they're using their own fuel to get there, it's actually still within Scope 3 as far as Portsmouth City Council is concerned. So there is a bit of double counting and a bit of work that needs to be done to very carefully draw some lines around some of these areas. It's just one example of where there's complication within the scopes and reporting.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't going to speak on this, but Andrew, you touched on something which I thought was topical. So you spoke about, obviously, there probably being quite large costs associated with Lakeside, and as somebody that works there, I can see that, and especially with my council hat on. And I was just wondering perhaps if, I suppose probably in the near future, one of the things that I've found perplexing for years, and more so since we purchased a property as a council, is that we still don't even have, beyond having sensors that bring lights on and off, we don't have a full range of LED lighting across that estate. Like in my office, we still have really old-fashioned tubes, and the contractor there will not upgrade it to LED lighting without charging that back to the tenants, which, okay, so I don't particularly have an issue with that, but as we know, that's expensive, and I know that there are other tenants across there, because I have lots of friends that work there who are in the same position, and whereas some businesses who perhaps don't have the same eco-credentials that we aspire to are like, well, it's fine, we'll just keep paying for what we've got there, which is obviously much cheaper in terms of replacing those types of lighting, but in the long term, it's not great. It's certainly not good in terms of our carbon aspirations, but I think it sends a bad message as well, as one of our flagship acquisitions as a council, that the building is very old, and I think it has a lot of potential. There are other things as well that which are great, but there are other things there which I think probably lead more into this work, and especially around what we're looking at now here today, and that's everything from high-speed broadband. That building does not have high-speed broadband. It actually makes it difficult for a lot of commercial tenants that are in there to operate as effectively as what some of their staff members have got in terms of speed of broadband, especially with the new fibre, as they can get from working from home. And that always makes me a bit nervous in terms of long-term tenancy as well and occupancy of that site. And I think those are things that we clearly need to address in the immediate future. And I do wonder whether, because I think you're right, I think it's going to cost a lot of money to address all of these problems, but I think that they're the kind of bare basics, really, that we need to get right in terms of getting this site on track to meet our aspirations here within these documents, and what Council's committed to. And perhaps, I don't know whether this would even be out of the scope of the capital budget, but I don't know whether it's something that can be included, Leader, as a fairly urgent issue that needs to be addressed. I mean, I'm guessing we're talking a lot, and millions, tens of millions even potentially on the scale of that building, but I do think unless we get to grips with it, because I think it is our flagship acquisition, we need to lead by example on those things. But more so as well, if we want an effective economy with a strong business base, we need to be able to give them, least of all, things like high-speed broadband. But actually, I think a lot of businesses, while they're obviously always thinking about the costs, I think when you go into an old building, that while it has had a facelift and it does look like it's kind of state-of-the-art on the surface, it becomes very frustrating very quickly when you start to see behind the facade, and I do think that's something that we need to address. But again, I do caveat that with it is a recent acquisition of the council, and I appreciate it is a huge piece of work to undertake with large costs attached to it.
Cheryl.
Rob, could you drop me an email?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Everything was that simple. No, I really appreciate all the comments that have been made. Fully take that on board as well, and we'll take that away and come back, I suppose, at some point soon with more information how we're going to go forward. But obviously, I know you'll speak to Gerald about that as well. But yeah, thank you for that. That's a really good point to make. Any other questions at all or comments? No? Brilliant. Okay. Well, before we head off, I just want to say thank you to everyone who's attended, public and members here. It's been a really useful conversation to have, really useful points made. I think it's a good way that we can step forward together. We're obviously doing good work at the moment. We've got lots more to do. We'll have more reports coming forward, more meetings. And yeah, no, I just want to thank you all for your time for coming today. And I think that's it for today. So thank you, everyone.